Hello and welcome to the Lund University International Podcast. On the show, you'll hear from current students, alumni, teachers, and many more special guests as we explore what it's really like to live and study in Lund. My name is Maria Lindblad, and I am a recruitment manager here at Lund University. Today, we're going to talk about a fun topic that we do get a lot of questions about every year, and that is the topic of learning Swedish. So if you are an incoming international student and you're coming to Lund to study and you're wondering, well, will I need to speak Swedish, or would it be fun to learn some Swedish, or can I do it on the side of my studies, and all these questions, this is the episode for you. So we're going to dive deeply into this topic today. And with us, we have a special guest, or a returning guest to the podcast, Frankie.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
So would you just like to introduce yourself, who you are?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Frank Schreier, and I'm a previous alumnus of the master program in Media and Communication Studies, and I now work for the university too.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the reasons why we selected Frankie to talk about this was actually because I met Frankie very early on when you had just arrived as an international student here at Lund. And his Swedish was amazing after just a few months. And I was super impressed. And of course, now we have to learn. How did you do this? So let's start there. Let's start with your story. How did you manage to learn Swedish like that?
Oh, it's so kind of you to say that. I mean, looking back, and even still how I speak Swedish today, sometimes I think it's really a mess. Or what am I even doing here? What am I saying? But no, it means a lot to hear that, because it was really important to me when I was going to move here. I thought, I wanted to... It was just really high on my list of objectives. I wanted to learn the language. And I had previously lived abroad too. So I had lived in France when I was in high school. And that helped me, I think, with some of the basics of coming into a new culture, coming into a new language, and also realizing how important it is with language to learn, to meet the people, to learn the culture and things like that. So I had been in Sweden once before. I had, for those years before, when I was first in Sweden and having moved, I was doing things like Duolingo, listening to podcasts and stuff. And then when I got here, I was like, okay, it's time. And I think I was just trying it. And so, yeah, it's nice to hear that you thought it was so good.
Yeah. So was there a particular reason why you felt like I really want to learn Swedish, as you said, to get into the culture? Or were you afraid that you would not get by on English? Or what was kind of your motivation behind so strongly wanting to learn Swedish?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a lot just to learn about the culture and to fit in here. I didn't know if I was going to stay in Sweden at that time. And I had definitely heard the stereotypes that everyone in Sweden speaks such good English. And that's definitely been my experience too. I see how it's possible to get by on a master's program here and not maybe need to learn the language to, survive and get by. But for me, that wasn't really enough. I really wanted to meet people. I really wanted to make friends. I wanted to get involved. And as time went on, and I saw some job opportunities in the future, I was thinking, okay, this is going to be important maybe for work too. And so as it always is with language, I think I had to really let go of my ego and just be like, okay, I'm going to sound crazy. I'm not going to sound good. People will hear my accent, hear the grammatical mistakes and all of that stuff. But just go for it anyway. And then I had to be really stubborn and force myself to, no matter how embarrassing this might feel sometimes, I just have to do it. And that was really what was going on for me emotionally, I think, in the process.
Yeah, and you clearly did a great job. So let's dive in a little bit to the actual practical steps. So what was the sort of first thing you did when you were like, okay, right, I'm here, I have to start learning? Like, how did you go about it?
Definitely. After I got here, that was, a year on Duolingo first. And then I was thinking, okay, simple things. I can always order in a cafe or restaurant, and I can always talk in a grocery store. I was like, those two things I'm not going to depend on English for. Maybe other times, at the bank or something like this, I might ask for or to do things in English, but I can order a coffee, and it was a lot of those things, which is fun because then it was the cultural side I got to learn right away. Coming from the United States, there are all of these unnecessary polite things you have to do and make conversation and say thank you a million times and say please a million times. But so often when you're ordering a coffee here, it's please and thank you are the same word and you just say it once.
It makes it easier, yeah.
And they think it's really strange if you ask them how their day's going. So it simplified the process really, to not have to make a bunch of small talk everywhere. And that helped me calm down and be like, oh, okay, I don't always have to be the first to speak. I can see what they're going to say and try to respond. And stuff like that. So it was really just those few micro moments where I was like, I have to do these things. And then as time went on, there was the stubbornness I had to come into, not just with myself, to force myself in those moments, like going to the doctor, forcing myself, you have to do this in English, even if it means having Google Translate open on your phone, or you have to do this in Swedish, even if it means having Google Translate open. But then stubbornness with when people heard my accent or the mistakes I was making or all of that and switched to English for me to be nice and accommodating. Then I had to say, just keep responding in Swedish, just keep responding in Swedish. And it was painstaking at first, but over time, I think it paid off. It worked at least. So those were the first steps, I would say.
So you just dove right in the deep end, it seems. So what about formal classes? Did you take classes? And if so, what were they?
Definitely took classes, and I can definitely recommend doing that. I started with the Swedish for Immigrants SFI courses, SFE courses. And there's the special, they had made one, I think, just for master's students. And I started with that one. And I was lucky enough that I had gotten my personal number quickly enough, and I got in. I'd come to Lund, I think, a week before the orientation weeks and stuff. So I was applying for all of this stuff really early and got in right away. So I was able to finish the master's level, or the course that was for master's students. And then I was able to do the formal SFE, which was the one where you get grades and where you have all of these different levels and take tests, like the national test and stuff. And because I did all of those while I was studying, then I was able to, once I started working here, apply for the university's Swedish as a second language courses. And those were really good. And to study at the university level, and obviously I think this is a great university, but really great teachers, both at SFE and at the university. But together, I think all of those courses really helped me formalize a little bit.
There was a lot to unpack there, I think, for our listeners here. It's like, whoa, what are all these things? And master students and SFE and all of that. So let's try to unpack that a little bit. So when you come to Lund University as an international student and you register with the city, basically as a resident of Lund or Malmö or Helsingborg, depending on what campus you're at, you can then sign up for the so-called Swedish for Immigrant classes. But you need to first get your Swedish residence number or personal number, as it's called here in Sweden. And once you have that, you can sign up for these classes. And just as you said, Frank, because we have so many students here in Lund, the city makes a special class for Lund University students, because normally these are offered by the municipality for anybody who moves in, any immigrant, anybody who's moving into Sweden and wants to learn Swedish. But of course, with so many international students, that is sort of a class in itself. And then you explained that you went on to the sort of regular classes as well. But if we start to dig into those SFE classes that were for the master students or for international students at Lund, how were they structured? How intense is it? How do you balance it with your regular studies and so on?
Yeah, great question. It was kind of interesting because it seems like it was a class that was constantly ongoing. You could jump in sort of at any time. And I think they designed it that way to make it flexible. So as people were getting their residence numbers or their personal numbers to be able to join, then you can just jump in instead of waiting for next term. And so we jumped in, and there were a lot of people who were in a very similar, situation as me. They were international students, everyone. And then we picked up there, and they did have a way of bringing us in, even though we had just started, and learning introductions while going over some more advanced stuff. And I did that for about a year, that course. And I do believe, I can't remember exactly if there was a grade from it or not, or maybe it was just a pass so that you could go on to the regular structured levels. But yeah, it was really fun. And to meet a lot of students who I would have never been in class with, engineers, as a social scientist.
Yeah.
So I got to meet a lot of people from all over.
So it's actually a social event too, in a way. Yeah, to meet other students. So how often were the classes? Do you remember? Was it like once or twice a week? Or
it was a couple times a week.
Yeah.
A lot of homework and home readings, a few projects to prepare. Not a lot of group work outside of class.
No.
Yeah, I would say that I think that I've heard now from our students since after the pandemic, there's more online or hybrid versions of that course too. But back when I took it, it was all in person at the adult education center. And it was 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah. But it was then in the evenings, I assume. So
I took the English ones, or the evening ones. Yeah.
So you can get on with your regular studies as well. Well, that's great. We did mention here earlier that in order to have access to the SFE courses, you need to have your residency or your personal number and so on, which of course can take a few weeks or so at the start of the semester. So that's good to be aware of. And also, of course, we do have students coming in who are staying perhaps only a year or for other reasons cannot get a Swedish personal number. And then the university has a few introductory classes in Swedish that you can take. But in addition to that, what would you suggest, Frank, if somebody doesn't have access to SFE? What other tools do you see are available to learn Swedish?
Totally. There was one really good one that I took part in a few times, and that were these language cafes.
Oh, yeah.
And there you can go for really more than just Swedish. You can go for lots of languages. But the Swedish table was definitely one of the most popular there. And that was a good one also because it was so it was unstructured in a way compared to in a class where you have readings and it's about history sometimes or things like that. That's more of, it's interesting, but I don't know. But there it was just purely social. So that was a lot of fun to have to not just, you're learning about people, but not only that, you have to learn how to speak casually and socially. And that part was really valuable with the language cafes, and that there were so many. They were really all over the town. There was one almost every day. And so depending on how much you want to devote to it, you can really get a lot of experience through those too. For anyone, this isn't exactly an equal opportunity, but there are courses that people can pay for, I've heard, at the folk universities or the people universities. And I had some friends take those and said they were good, but I didn't take those.
Yeah. Well, that's really good to know. And as you mentioned before, of course, the university has courses also, but that doesn't work when you're in the full program. So That's after you've graduated. If you want to learn more, there are other courses you can take. You also talked a little bit about digital tools. You mentioned before that you did some Duolingo. How was that? And do you feel that helped you? And do you know if there are other tools like that are useful as well?
Duolingo really did help me. I thought it's nice that it was gamified a little bit. It was like a game and kept me motivated. And I learned a lot of vocabulary and basic things there that then I could use in those micro moments like I was talking about. Other digital things, I was listening to this, I think it was Swedish 101 pod. It was kind of a cheesy podcast, but I listened to it anyway just to get the used to the sound of Swedish, get used to some of the words. And those were the two that I used the most. But now I'm seeing so many. I know there are TikTok channels where people are teaching Swedish. And I'm sure there are other podcasts or even podcasts that are just in Swedish. Even if you don't understand everything that's going on, just getting used to hearing how the language sounds, the way, sort of the rhythm of the language and the way that when people pause, how people listen, how people talk and interact with each other. I think is useful. I watched a lot. I remember just searching sometimes on YouTube, like Swedish news when I was back in the United States, because I was like, I just want to hear what like the most like normal Swedish sounds like, and that's probably whatever is on the news. And I was just listening to try to hear like, what does it sound like? So I would say, even if it's not a structured course, just getting the input and getting yourself used to hearing the language.
That's a really good advice there. So you talked a lot about also the cultural aspect and sort of listening and actually forcing yourself to interact. So besides the courses, or if there are some students who feel, I don't actually have time for courses, I really want to focus on my studies, but I still want to pick up some Swedish, or what are the other ways that you think that you can sort of pick up some Swedish, or be forced to use your Swedish, because while on campus, everybody speaks English. So how do you put yourself in positions where you're like, you have to speak Swedish now?
Yeah. Oh, and this is, I still feel it a little bit in my stomach and my chest, how nervous I was going to some of these student groups and being like, I want to join, and then telling myself, Frankie, you have to do this in Swedish, even if it's painstaking, and you just feel so embarrassed. And you've only been in Sweden for a month. Like, I joined the student newspaper, and I was like, just force yourself. And they had parties and picnics and stuff. And I got invited to all these things. And it was some of the first friends I made in Sweden who were Swedish, were from those groups. And it's really that just, I feel nervous, and I feel nervous, but just pushing through it. You just have to do it. And it was probably how, when I met you, I was like, this is a Swedish person, just speak Swedish with her. And and just forcing myself, really. And so the student groups were very useful for making friends too. And I still know some of those people that I met there. So it was definitely had a lot to do with those student groups were one. The store, I remember a lot. And then, and that helped me learn a lot of the cultural things too, and also to place myself in a group of people and observe, okay, this is how they're interacting with each other. A big difference compared to the United States, was how often I had been used to in the United States inserting myself in conversations, or not being as good of a listener first. And I really had to learn to just wait for this person to say everything they have to say, and then I can respond.
Yeah.
Instead of hopping in when something's relevant to me or something, and that, in a funny way, really relieved some of the pressure of the nervousness of speaking Swedish, was because, you don't really need to interject with a lot of things, and you can wait for someone to speak first to you. Or, I think people are more comfortable with silence here sometimes. So we don't have to fill every interaction with words all the time.
No, and I think also when you're learning a language, you're inevitably more quiet, because you're thinking about what to say next, and creating that sentence in your head and trying to sound like semi-smart in the conversation. So it is that is a challenge for sure. And then, like you said, I think it's really interesting point to understand the culture, that it's not just the words or the language, it's actually understanding how do people speak. And of course, besides joining organizations like you were talking about, or forcing yourself at the supermarket to talk to somebody, you can volunteer, or you can get involved in different activities as well. That's also a good way to learn. And that kind of ties us into a question we get often, and that is, of course, work opportunities, internships, things like that. Do I need Swedish for that? And we tell students that, this is an international place. There are many global companies where the working language is English, but obviously there are smaller companies where they do work in Swedish, and the society as a whole is, in the end, Swedish. So what is your perspective and your tips there? Like, if somebody does want to stay in Sweden, or they want to work in Sweden, or they want to get an internship in Sweden, should they try to learn some Swedish? And if so, what do you think is the most important part there?
Definitely. My opinion is yes, 100%. And I say this with the biggest caveat ever, because I have so many friends here who haven't needed to, learn Swedish, or to the extent that they could work in Swedish. They found jobs where they didn't need it. And so I say it with a big caveat, because I know that there's so many different opportunities for people here and across the world. But I have found that it's been hugely rewarding to speak Swedish and to dare, even in like, I remember some of my first job interviews, just how nervous I was to do any part of it in Swedish. But then the feedback I got afterward was really great. And I was like, okay, this is worth it. This is really worth it. And I came in, you might come into jobs where you don't need Swedish for that particular job, but do you want your career to develop? And do you want to be able to maybe lead a team one day and have to interact with different parts of a business or different parts of an organization or parts of society? And all of those things have been hugely benefited by, in my life, has been very beneficial to have been able to speak Swedish, even broken, even not perfect, even with my accent, and to be able to just interact and do that. And I think that on that note, work has been one of the best places for development of my Swedish. And I've really learned a lot here. Really learned a lot when it comes to, meetings and all of that stuff. And I remember some of my first meetings, not understanding everything and then being nervous afterward. Did I miss an important detail? And then I'm going to miss something about this project and stuff like that. But you get by. And as time goes on, you get in more to it, and then you can see how your career can start to develop because of the language skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And we do tell students that, even if you find a job where the working language is English, try to learn a little bit of Swedish just so that you can have a coffee and chit chat with your colleagues in the coffee room, or just for social purposes. It's fun, and they really appreciate it if you can say a couple of sentences at least. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think many people maybe hold back also because they want it to be perfect before they open their mouths. And I'm certainly like that myself when I learn a new language. So yeah, some good tips there that just, put yourself out there and start, and which is of course even scarier in a work environment, but it sounds like you managed very well.
Yeah, that was because that's where you really want people to take you seriously. You want them to think that you're smart and all of these things.
Yeah.
And I've really had to break down this notion in my mind I had that perfect grammar in a foreign language means that I'm smart, and that anything less would mean that I'm somehow dumb or stupid or something. It's not that at all. It's the contrary. How cool that you're in a different country pushing to do business or to work in an organization in a different language. I mean, that requires more intelligence, I would say. But for some reason, there's this notion that it's hard. I don't know.
Yeah.
Why we think those two things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. And I started to just state in my mind, in myself, I haven't told too many people this, but when I was really feeling bad about my Swedish or my French, like, this is just my voice. People call it an accent, but that's just my voice. I sound this way in English too, It just is what it is.
And by the way, to the listeners, Frank has no accent in Swedish. His Swedish is absolutely perfect. But now you've had some time in Sweden, though, to be fair, so we don't expect everybody to sound like you do immediately. I'm curious because I'm Swedish, of course, so it's hard for me to see, like, what are the hurdles in the Swedish language and so on. So just out of curiosity, like, what was the most challenging for you when learning Swedish?
The most challenging, you mean on like a grammar level or like
well, you can elaborate on any aspect of it. But.
Because what I struggled with most was really my like need for perfection. And when I was able to release that, let go of my ego, and then be stubborn with myself and with others, I would feel a lot of times really discouraged when people responded to me in English after I spoke to them in Swedish. And I know that it was just out of the goodness of their hearts to accommodate me or make me feel more comfortable. But I felt even more uncomfortable because I'm like, oh gosh, now this whole group has to switch to English just for me. And thanks, but let me struggle through this, So the stubbornness of just keep responding in Swedish. That was something that I really was challenging for me. And then the cultural things, I'm still learning this stuff, but I'm trying really hard to just observe every moment I can, how people are interacting, what they say when, if you fall, it's really snowy and icy here right now. And if you fall on the ground, they say like, did it go well? And I was like, gick det bra? And I'm like, no, it didn't go well. I just fell, but they mean, is everything okay?
Are you hurt? Yeah.
And I would have translated, is everything okay? Or are you okay? But no, they want to know, did it go well? Like, it went well if you're not hurt. So these kinds of things I'm trying to observe at every moment. And that's something that is probably a lifelong process for my life here in Sweden. It's been almost 7 years now.
Yeah.
But we'll continue.
Oh, that's funny. That's great. Well, I hope that this inspires people and gives you some tips and ideas. Do you have any final tips for our listeners if they're on their way to Lund and they really do want to learn some Swedish when I get there?
Mm-hmm. Start early. If you're interested now, it's not going to hurt to learn some words, to download Duolingo, to do that stuff. Start early with just the basics that you can. And start early telling yourself that it doesn't matter if you make mistakes, or it doesn't matter if you think you sound weird, because it's just your voice. And things change. And I would just say the whole thing about just letting go, just let it be. And observing. Yeah. Observing helps me a lot too. Yeah.
Thank you, Frankie. That's some great advice. And thank you to our listeners. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Lund University International Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lund University International Podcast. If you are interested in learning more about Lund University, you can go to our website, lunduniversity.lu.se. You can also follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and X, and you can chat with current students on Unibuddy. Don't forget to subscribe, and we look forward to bringing you a new episode very soon.